Hey, how's life? This is Sam Harris Reading List number 2. I know the numbering is going to get pretty crazy because I have like 15 things going on at once right now, but still, this is Sam Harris Reading List, and I have different musical cues at the beginning of each one, so hopefully it'll clue you in as to what is going on the given episode. This one, it's The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. And I know the first one's by Richard Dawkins as well, but like I said, in the Goodreads list, the 186 books, it's actually organized by popularity. So Dawkins, relative to all the rest of them on the list, he's got some popularity, so that's why these ones are coming first. But this is just how we're going to do it, so it's all in order. This one, The Selfish Gene, I had never read it before, and I've got my notes here, but I've read it a while ago now, on this reading. So hopefully I remember what the heck my notes mean and can speak as to the content somewhat competently, but don't hold your breath. So it talks about, and of course the selfish gene, the idea is, and kind of the overarching idea is that our genes are just competing for their own survival, and we're a cumulative effect of that competition. So it's just the genes are doing what's best for them, and that creates all the stuff that we do, like talking into a microphone about a book to some people over the interwebs. It starts out talking about how it's not an argument for nature or nurture. It's not really about that, which I always thought was, there's kind of an artificiality between that, in that distinction. Because you got, nature, like genetics and biology, versus nurture, the things that happen as a result of genetics and biology. Whatever your predilections are, they're governed by your biology, by the genetics. So whatever susceptibility you have to any kind of nurturing, it's going to be governed by that. I find it a curious distinction. And they kind of set out altruism versus selfishness. Of course, this is another one of those distinctions. It's like, okay, how much do you zoom in that creates these meaningless distinctions? Because altruism versus selfishness. Obviously, altruism can be selfish. You could be altruistic to a member of a group that you believe is going to make your group stronger, which is going to benefit you. And that's the thing. But you set up these dichotomies that there's altruism where you do something for somebody else, and there's selfishness where you do something for yourself. And it's like distinguishing between, it's trying to argue for free will or something like that. It's cutting it off at a certain point, and that's the only way that you can get something meaningful out of it, a meaningful concept. But Dawkins says it's not about secret motives, and I can't remember. It's in the context of altruism versus selfishness, and I can't remember explicitly what that was talking about. So he goes into the proper level of competition, and this is an interesting concept. It's like, okay, where is the competition actually happening? Is it at the individual level, the species level, the phyla level? Where does it stop? Where does it start? So within our species, we generally don't, and this of course is generalism, but we generally don't wantonly kill our own species and eat our own species, but we do that for others. Cows, we do that pretty regularly and don't seem to have much of a problem with it, but that's something we're biologically inclined to do, to get meat out of cows, but not out of other people, of course, with some Hannibal-like exceptions. I was just watching, what is that? The Red Dragon? I really feel like, what's his frickin' face? Fight Club, Edward Norton. I really felt like Edward Norton just phoned in that performance. Like there was something, you could tell, I don't know why it was kind of a terrible director, wasn't it? It was like Brett Ratner or something. But you could tell that a lot of the stuff that Edward Norton was doing at a lot of those points, he was totally self-conscious of what he was doing. He was bored with it. He was just thinking about, okay, I need to say these lines. It's not like as in like Birdman or another Edward Norton movie or Fight Club. He's a good actor. When he wants to act, he could be fantastic. American History X, even though that movie has lots of problems, he does a great job through the movie. He can really act, and in that, he was just phoning it in. Why did just because I brought up Hannibal. I'm so sorry. So we don't kill or eat our own. So it would be like speciesism versus racism. What's the level? Which level is important? Order, class, etc. Should lions not kill antelope for moral reasons? Should they work together or something like that? Cue some Lion King music. In chapter 3, he starts talking about mutations in the Bible. So he brings up the Alma and the Septuagint becoming the Greek So the Hebrew Alma becomes the Greek Parthenos, and it transfigures the meaning of that concept from young woman to virgin. So it adds that extra thing. And then, so in Isaiah, it's talking about a young woman, but in the Greek translation, it says Parthenos. So Matthew thinks it means a virgin, not just a young woman will conceive and bear a child. So it's just an incidence of mutation. Then he goes on to talk about the origin of life, and he talks about the extinction of other replicators, and there could have been other replicators that were related to DNA, or they could have been something else entirely. From what I understand, the origin of life, some version of RNA is what's considered the progenitor of life. This is another distinction that people love to make, is that there's something so incredibly different between alive and not alive. I don't think there is, but there you go. He talks about chapter 4. He talks about how the pairs of chromosomes are not physically paired, and I never realized this. They're always depicted as physically paired, so I thought our chromosomes were physically paired, but apparently they are not. And then he talks about how there's no clear definition for a gene, Like, we talk about genes as some kind of collection of base pairs, but, we just look at, okay, this particular sequence codes for this particular amino acid, which codes for this particular, which combines for this particular protein, and it seems to do something, so therefore we call it a gene. But there's not really a clear definition for a gene, because there can often be chunks within larger chunks that do something on their own, and then do something with a greater chunk, and I love all my technical terms in all this. And one interesting idea as well, he talked about the shorter the gene, the more likely it is to survive. So the more you're paring down whatever your gene is to get something accomplished, the more likely it's not going to have a mutation going forward, because it's shorter base pairs. So the fewer the base pairs, the more likely it is to survive. And that's a really interesting concept. And it's not simply about, Dawkins says, getting as many genes passed on as possible, because only half your genes are passed on, make it into the next generation. So there's some kind of an alchemy, a mathematical conception that says it's worth it to have sexual reproduction and lose half of the genes in your offspring, to have half of the genes that you would otherwise be passing on. Talks a little bit about vestigial DNA. I know a lot of times vestigial DNA gets appropriated for new types of stuff, but I don't remember how deeply he went into that. And then he talks about in the next chapter, he's talking about, because this was written in, late 80s or something like that. And it's talking about how transistors are catching up to neurons and numbers. Of course, now we've got deep mind and AI and quantum computing and that sort of stuff, which is just going to blow everything we can imagine out of the water. The structure of the brain has axons and then nerves and then ganglia. A ganglion is a structure containing a number of nerve cell bodies, typically linked by synapses, and often forming a swelling on a nerve fiber. And as far as I understand it, like the brain technically altogether is a ganglion. Ganglion is probably, the right one. Animals like sea anemones have direct contact between sense organs and muscle contractions. Humans have a complex intermediary. It's our brain goes in between, and all this other system goes in between our sense organs, and our muscle contractions. So we've got a mediator who's saying, okay, this is how you need to react, muscly. This is how you need to react based on the sense input that we're getting. And then he goes in to talk about chess computers, and I've actually been looking into this a lot lately. We've got, right now, there's AlphaZero seems to be the champ. There's Stockfish, which I have on my computer, and I haven't actually played it yet. I've been playing on my phone a whole bunch. I haven't played Stockfish yet, but these computers, they're getting very, very good right now. Humans, I think I was looking up the ELO score for some humans, like the top humans. I know Magnus Carlsen, the best chess player in the world currently, he had, I've seen him flirting with 3,000 ELO, but the highest one I saw when I looked this up was 2843. That's the highest ELO. And the computers were playing around 3,000 ELO. So most, the best computers can beat the best people most of the time. In the next, or one of the following chapters, he talks about aphids and how they reproduce sexually and asexually. That's fascinating. They can do that. And one of the things when it comes to incest and family members interbreeding with family members is that lethal recessive genes are more likely to be expressed when you commit incest. So the recessive genes would otherwise, they wouldn't be expressed because they're recessive if you only have, one copy. But if you reproduce and they both get a lethal recessive, then it'll be lethal. And that's why. And it could be it's not necessarily lethal. It could just be a negative gene that gets expressed, even though it's recessive because you have family reproducing. So then they went into this group selection controversy, and this is another one I don't even, it's group selection versus kin selection, and I don't see how this is actually a thing. E.O. Wilson supports group selection, Dawkins supports kin selection. There's a question of whether it's just semantic or substantive. The causation is extremely complex when it relates to, these selective pressures and how organisms select and at what level they're selecting. And I say the organisms selecting, I just mean the selective pressures having an impact on the organisms from the natural selection. So it's there's a lot to unpack and all that, but I don't know if this is actually a real scientific conflict. It seems really odd, but it's group selection versus kin selection. And the name suggests it, but I don't even know if I have enough of a grasp on it to really effectively describe it. Because I listened to a talk about this specifically, group selection versus kin selection, to try to figure out, okay, what's the controversy here? And it didn't make sense. And now isn't the best time. I'm pretty tired right now. I did not sleep last night, so I don't know if now is the best time for me to be analyzing this. But yeah, I can't really pull a whole bunch of meaning out of this. Obviously, there's group selection, so you're selecting for an entire group of things, and there's kin selection, you're selecting for people who are closely related to you. But it's a matter of scale, quite obviously. So I don't know. Later chapter, there's a fundamental asymmetry between males and females, tiny and numerous gametes versus large and singular gametes. So they have to have competing strategies in populations to reproduce. And that's why, of course, that would express itself in the way that, men and women are treated and the way men and women act in our social construct, as people love to say. But there are legitimate biological differences on balance between males and females, and they use different strategies for reproduction. Then there was one thing the deliberate handicap theory. So where this theory is about an animal or some other kind of organism that deliberately handicaps themselves to show themselves superior to the opposite sex and gain an advantage in reproduction it'd be like breaking your arm and then getting into a fight and still winning, and you look so much more impressive because you broke your arm first. But so this would be in a selection context, that there are certain traits are selected for, even though they're a handicap, because they exhibit to the, your potential reproductive mate that you're so exceptional that you can have this handicap and still succeed. I don't know enough about this, but I know Dawkins was extremely critical and suspicious of this idea at first, but it's becoming more plausible to him as time goes on. So it's, I have a phrase in here, risk as advertisement. So it's that kind of risk. You're willing to take a risk. You're really willing to deliberately handicap yourself as an advertisement for your superiority or incredibleness. So, and I think he just, at a certain point, he just goes through 100 different strategies, and they're all based on the same premises. And so I just, it's about maximizing reproduction through different strategies. It's all right, great. And then there's this idea of the He-Man versus domestic bliss, and I can't remember all the details of that, but it was like He-Man from the cartoon versus domestic bliss, and I can't remember the significance of that particularly. There's an idea here, and this is why I should have recorded this, because I remember this being a resonant idea when I initially read about it. It's something about bird alarm calls and how they relate to selfish gene theory. And there's something about the kin in the population. You'd want to protect the population because your kin has something to do with it, is likely part of it, but okay. Apparently female ants have genes for being a queen and a worker, and social factors determine which one is going to be expressed. So that's interesting. So any female ant could become a queen, but the vast majority become workers because of social factors. And actually, I remember this being pretty interesting topic, but I didn't put a whole bunch in my notes here. I'm just trying to give you a broad overview of what's going on in this book here and some commentary on it. Then later chapter talks about special cultural evolution. Oh, this is one thing. This is another thing. This probably drives me crazy more than anything out of everything that's in this, is where it talks about cultural evolution as something different from just genetic evolution or natural selection, whatever else. It's like cultural evolution in that we act in certain ways and create a culture that's somehow divorced entirely from our genetics and biology. That doesn't make any sense to me. Something like he talked about using contraception, and that was against our genes, so therefore look at us, we're pulling ourselves out of the, the genetic whatever, the momentum. We're not slaves to natural selection and reproduction and all that stuff. And of course, using contraception is just a bad reproductive strategy. Organisms use bad reproductive strategies all the time, like being idiots or sliding up on girls and say, you drop something, my jaw. Like this. Those happen all the time. It's just a bad reproductive strategy. And obviously, it happens all over the place, and it's not particularly significant to point out that, this is some kind of a magical, incredible moment that we get to stride our way out of the reproductive alchemy, the churning furnace of reproduction and natural selection and evolution. We get to stride our way out of that because we're so incredible by throwing a condom on. It's just a bad reproductive strategy. It's not particularly significant. And then it talks about brains being against our genes, like we can just think against our genes. It's like, again, if I have the thought that I want to maximize my resources to make things better for myself in lieu of having children, that's just a bad reproductive strategy. It's not anything significant. It's not like I get to metaphysically claim that I've walked out of evolution, don't have to worry about it. It's just I'm not going to be able to I'm not going to reproduce. I'm less likely to reproduce. So I find this concept ridiculous. And then later, finally, it talks about the prisoner's dilemma and the kind of, the game theory background of the prisoner's dilemma, where you have two prisoners. If they work together, they both get a good amount. If they go against each other, then, if one goes against and the other one doesn't, then the one who went against gets a whole bunch. And if they both go against, then they both lose. So it's okay, that back and forth game theory thing. You have to figure out, okay, what's he thinking? What's he think that I'm thinking? What does he think that I'm thinking that he's thinking? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I can't remember why this was significant in this context, but overall, I think there were a lot of good ideas within this particular read. And I don't know if I'm going to, I don't think I was going to lab each of the books. I just wanted to give an overview and my thoughts on the books themselves and a recommendation whether they're necessary reads or not. Like I said, there are a lot of, it's great to learn about evolution in general, and there were a lot of good ideas. My favorite idea is definitely related to, I should have known this already, but aphids, I didn't realize they reproduce sexually and asexually. So that's good. The idea about the sea anemones having direct contact between sense organs and muscle contractions and our intermediaries, that's good stuff. The idea about the genes, and the shorter the genes, more likely to survive, and lethal recessive genes being more likely to be expressed with incest. Yeah, a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff in there. It's a nice survey of some ideas related to evolutionary biology, and I think even more than that, there's that huge, extremely powerful idea that we are just vessels for selfish genes that are looking to reproduce. And I know he kind of decried that reading of it as too simplistic or something like that. In the book, he kind of decried it. I think it might have been in a foreword or something like that. But I really think, that's the big idea, is that there are genes that are competing, and that's the cumulative effect of that fact is what creates us and creates all of our interest in industry and pickup lines and and all that sort of stuff. So that's just it's a brief run through. It's worth a read. I don't know where I'd rank it. I'm going to have to go through it and kind of decide which are the best ones that people absolutely need to read and which ones are kind of in the middle. The God Delusion, especially now that it's kind of succeeded in its effort with the other three horsemen's work. The God Delusion and The Selfish Gene, the two books that I've gone through so far, they're in the middle somewhere. You could look up the ideas, especially from this one, The Selfish Gene. I'd advise that at least, but they're somewhere in the middle. It's not, you absolutely need to read that, but it's good stuff. So, all right, so that's going to be that. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'm going to take a nap. Thank you very much.